The air on Zorath 7 was thick with smoke and the acrid smell of burning metal. The once peaceful colony, nestled between jagged red mountains and endless fields of glowing fungi, now resembled a war zone. Craters pockmarked the ground where buildings used to stand, and the hum of alien weapons echoed through the valley. The humans were losing, badly. Daniel Carter crouched behind a crumbling wall, his hands trembling as he reloaded his rifle. His face was streaked with dirt and sweat, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. He glanced over at Laura Bennett, who was tending to a wounded man nearby. Her movements were quick but deliberate, her medical kit nearly empty after days of relentless fighting. She caught his gaze for a moment and gave him a weak smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "They're coming again," someone shouted from farther down the line. Daniel turned his head just in time to see flashes of light in the distance, the telltale sign of another Vrax advance. The alien soldiers moved like shadows, their sleek black armor blending into the darkness. They were fast, silent, and deadly. Every encounter with them ended the same way. More human lives lost, more ground given up. "Hold your positions," yelled Captain Lewis, a grizzled older man whose voice carried even above the chaos. But everyone knew what holding their positions really meant. It meant dying where they stood. The colonists had no reinforcements, no escape plan, and no hope of winning this fight. All they could do was delay the inevitable. Laura finished bandaging the injured man's leg and crawled over to Daniel. "How much longer can we keep this up?" she asked softly, her voice barely audible over the distant explosions. He shook his head. "Not long. Maybe hours, maybe minutes. Either way, it doesn't matter." She frowned but didn't argue. Both of them had seen enough to know he was right. The colony's defenses were falling apart piece by piece. Their automated turrets had been destroyed early in the invasion, leaving them reliant on outdated rifles and sheer determination. Even the perimeter walls, once thought impenetrable, were now reduced to rubble. A sudden burst of gunfire snapped them out of their thoughts. One of the colonists, a young man named Jake, cried out as he fell backward, clutching his chest. Laura rushed to his side, but it was too late. His lifeless body slumped to the ground, joining the growing pile of casualties. Daniel clenched his fists, anger bubbling inside him. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. When Earth first sent settlers to Zorath 7, they promised safety, prosperity, a fresh start. Instead, all they got was death. And for what? To mine resources that would never make it back to Earth. To expand humanity's reach into a universe that clearly didn't want them. As if reading his mind, Laura said, "We should have left when we had the chance." He nodded grimly. Weeks ago, there had been talk of evacuating the colony before the Vrax arrived. But bureaucracy and misplaced optimism had delayed the decision until it was too late. Now, escape was impossible. The Vrax controlled the skies, their massive ships blocking any attempt to leave the planet. Another wave of attackers surged forward, forcing Daniel to push aside his thoughts and focus on survival. He raised his rifle and fired blindly into the advancing horde, knowing full well that each shot might be his last. Around him, other colonists did the same, their faces pale with fear, but resolute in their defiance. For a brief moment, Daniel allowed himself to imagine a different outcome. What if help came? What if Earth finally remembered them and sent reinforcements? It was a foolish thought, he knew, but it was all he had left to hold on to. Then the sound of heavy footsteps reached his ears. Dozens of Vrax soldiers emerged from the smoke, their weapons trained on the remaining defenders. Daniel swallowed hard, gripping his rifle tighter. Defeat was certain, but surrender wasn't an option. The night was cold, colder than usual for Zorath 7. Daniel sat on a broken piece of concrete, his rifle resting across his knees. His fingers were stiff from the chill, and his body ached from days of fighting. Around him, the colony lay in ruins. Smoldering fires lit up the darkness, casting eerie shadows on what remained of the buildings. The air smelled of smoke and something metallic, like blood. He stared at the horizon, where flashes of light signaled yet another Vrax attack brewing. Laura approached quietly, her boots crunching against the debris-strewn ground. She held a small device in her hand, its screen flickering weakly. "Daniel," she said softly, "you need to hear this." He looked up, his expression blank with exhaustion. "What is it?" "It's a message." Her voice trembled slightly as she handed him the device. "I intercepted it while trying to fix one of the old comms arrays." Daniel took the device and pressed it closer to his ear. At first, all he heard was static, but then a faint voice broke through. It was distant, distorted, but unmistakably human. "To all surviving colonies, reinforcements en route. Hold your positions." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving only silence. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Daniel let out a bitter laugh. "Reinforcements? From who? Earth abandoned us months ago." "I don't know," Laura admitted, sitting down beside him. "But it's something, isn't it? Maybe not much, but it's hope." "Hope won't stop those things out there," Daniel muttered, gesturing toward the distant glow of alien weapons. "Even if they're coming, they'll be too late. We can't hold out that long." Laura hesitated, her eyes searching his face. "Do you think anyone else heard it?" "No," he replied flatly. "And we shouldn't tell them." Her brow furrowed. "Why not?" "Because false hope is worse than no hope at all," Daniel said sharply. "If people start thinking help is coming, they'll stop fighting. They'll give up. And when nothing happens, they'll lose whatever will they have left." Laura opened her mouth to argue but closed it again. Deep down, she knew he was right. Still, the idea of keeping the message secret felt wrong, like snuffing out a tiny flame in an endless night. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the distant sounds of battle. Somewhere nearby, a group of colonists worked frantically to reinforce one of the barricades. Their voices carried over the wind, strained but determined. Laura watched them, her heart heavy with guilt. How could she sit here, knowing there might be a chance, however slim, that salvation was on the way? Finally, she spoke. "What if we try to send a reply, just to confirm we're still here?" Daniel shook his head. "The array's busted, remember? Even if we could get it working, the Vrax would detect our signal and pinpoint our location. We'd be dead before the message got through." She sighed, frustration bubbling inside her. "So we just wait and fight until there's nothing left." "What choice do we have?" Daniel asked bitterly. "We've been waiting since this whole mess started. Waiting for supplies, waiting for orders, waiting for someone to care. Looks like we're still waiting." As if on cue, the sound of gunfire erupted in the distance. Both of them flinched, instinctively reaching for their weapons. A few seconds later, shouts rang out. Panicked cries followed by the unmistakable roar of Vrax plasma cannons. "We should move," Daniel said, standing up. "That's coming from the south wall. If they break through there, the rest of the colony's exposed." Laura nodded, though her mind was still on the message. Reinforcements. Could it really be true? Or was it just some automated broadcast 10 years ago, drifting endlessly through space? She didn't know. And maybe she never would. But even the smallest possibility made her chest tighten with something she hadn't felt in weeks. Anticipation. Together, they ran toward the chaos, their footsteps echoing against the shattered remains of their home. Behind them, the glowing fungi pulsed faintly, casting an otherworldly light over the battlefield. For now, the fight continued, and so did the waiting. The days blurred together, each one darker than the last. The colony was falling apart, piece by piece. Supplies were running low, and exhaustion hung over everyone like a suffocating cloud. The barricades that once stood tall were now patched together with scraps of metal and debris, barely holding back the constant pressure from the Vrax. Every hour brought fresh attacks, and every attack left more bodies behind. Daniel leaned against the wall of what used to be the colony's main hall, his rifle resting on his lap. His eyes scanned the faces of the survivors around him. Some sat in silence, staring at nothing. Others argued loudly, their voices sharp with fear and frustration. Laura was nearby, tending to a young woman who had been injured during the last skirmish. Her hands moved quickly, but her expression betrayed how tired she was. "Why are we even still fighting?" a man named Kevin shouted suddenly, throwing down his weapon. "It's hopeless. We're all going to die here." Several heads turned toward him, but no one spoke. Kevin wasn't wrong. Most people knew it deep down, but saying it out loud made it feel real. Too real. "We fight because it's all we can do," Daniel said finally, his voice quiet but firm. He didn't look at Kevin as he spoke. "If we stop, they'll kill us anyway. At least this way, we go down swinging." Kevin glared at him, his face red with anger. "Swinging? For what? There's no point. No one's coming to save us." Before Daniel could respond, another voice cut in. "That's not true." Everyone turned to see Laura standing up, her hands still stained with blood from treating the wounded woman. She looked pale but resolute, her eyes meeting Kevin's defiantly. "There's a message," she said, lowering her voice so only those closest could hear. "I intercepted it a few days ago. Reinforcements might be on the way." A murmur rippled through the group. Some looked skeptical, others hopeful, but all were listening intently. "Reinforcements," Kevin spat, shaking his head. "From where? Earth forgot about us months ago. You really think they care now?" "I don't know where they're coming from," Laura admitted, her voice steady despite the weight of the stairs. "But I heard it myself. Someone is sending help." Daniel shot her a warning glance, but she ignored it. He had wanted to keep the message a secret, but maybe she was right. Maybe people needed something to hold on to, even if it turned out to be false. "And if they're not?" Kevin demanded, his tone bitter. "What then? We sit here and wait while the Vraks tear us apart." "No one's asking you to wait," Daniel snapped, stepping forward. "We keep doing what we've been doing. We fight. If help comes, great. If it doesn't." He paused, his jaw tightening. "Then we make sure the Vraks pay for every inch of ground they take." The argument died down after that, though the tension remained. People returned to their tasks, patching walls, checking weapons, caring for the wounded. But the mood had shifted. The idea of reinforcements, however unlikely, lingered in the air like a fragile thread holding them together. Later that evening, Daniel found Laura sitting alone near the edge of the camp. She was staring up at the sky, her arms wrapped around her knees. He sat down beside her without saying a word. "You shouldn't have told them," he said after a moment. "Maybe not," she replied softly. "But I couldn't stay quiet anymore. They needed to hear it." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Hope is dangerous, Laura. It makes people reckless. What happens when nothing shows up?" She turned to look at him, her eyes filled with determination. "Then we deal with it. But until then, let them believe. Let us believe. Because without hope, we've already lost." Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he followed her gaze upward, watching the stars twinkle faintly through the haze of smoke. Somewhere out there, beyond the endless void, was Earth, and maybe, just maybe, someone who hadn't forgotten about them. In the distance, the sound of an explosion broke the silence, pulling them both back to reality. The fight wasn't over yet. The night was eerily quiet, a rare moment of calm in the chaos that had consumed Zorath 7. Daniel stood guard at one of the colony's outer barricades, his rifle slung over his shoulder. The air felt heavy, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. He scanned the horizon, his eyes straining against the darkness. Something didn't feel right. Laura joined him a few minutes later, carrying a thermos of lukewarm water. "Here," she said, handing it to him. "You should drink something." He took it without a word, sipping slowly. The water tasted stale, but it was better than nothing. "Thanks," he muttered, glancing at her briefly before turning his attention back to the shadows beyond the wall. "Do you think they'll attack again tonight?" Laura asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," Daniel replied. But I don't trust this silence. It's like they're waiting for something. As if on cue, a low rumble echoed in the distance. At first, it sounded like thunder, but it grew louder and deeper, shaking the ground beneath their feet. Both Daniel and Laura froze, exchanging a glance. "What is that?" Laura whispered, her grip tightening on the strap of her medical bag. Before Daniel could answer, the sky lit up with a blinding flash. Massive shapes descended through the clouds, their outlines sharp against the orange glow of the planet's twin moons. They weren't Vrax ships. They were too large, too angular, unlike anything either of them had ever seen. "They're not ours," Daniel said under his breath, his heart pounding. "Are they?" Laura shook her head, her eyes wide with disbelief. "I don't know. But whoever they are, they're here." The ships hovered above the battlefield for a moment before releasing dozens of drop pods. They streaked through the atmosphere like shooting stars, crashing into the ground with deafening booms. One landed just outside the colony's perimeter, kicking up a cloud of dust and debris. Daniel raised his rifle, motioning for Laura to stay behind him. "Stay close," he warned, his voice tense. The pod's hatch hissed open, and figures emerged, tall, armored soldiers moving with precision and purpose. Their suits gleamed under the dim light, each one equipped with weapons far more advanced than anything the colonists had. They moved silently, scanning the area before advancing toward the colony. One of the soldiers stepped forward, his helmet visor reflecting the glow of nearby fires. He removed it, revealing the weathered face marked by scars and years of combat. His piercing gray eyes locked onto Daniel, who instinctively tightened his grip on his rifle. "Who are you?" Daniel demanded, his voice firm despite the fear clawing at his chest. The man studied him for a moment before speaking. "Ryan Mitchell," he said, his tone clipped and authoritative. "Operation Black Dawn. We're here to neutralize the Vrax threat." Daniel blinked, caught off guard. "Neutralize? You mean fight them?" Mitchell's lips curled into a faint smirk, something like that. Before Daniel could ask more questions, gunfire erupted in the distance. The Vrax had spotted the newcomers and were already launching an attack. Without hesitation, Mitchell turned to his team. "Move out. Secure the perimeter." The soldiers sprang into action, their movements fluid and coordinated. Within seconds, they had formed a defensive line, their weapons trained on the approaching enemy. The Vrax charged forward, their eerie cries cutting through the night. Daniel watched in stunned silence as the battle unfolded. These new soldiers fought with a level of skill and ruthlessness that left him speechless. Every shot was precise, every movement calculated. The Vrax fell quickly, their numbers dwindling under the relentless assault. Laura tugged at Daniel's arm, pulling him back toward the safety of the colony. "We need to get inside," she urged, her voice trembling. He nodded, though his gaze remained fixed on the scene before him. For the first time in days, there was a glimmer of hope. But as he looked at the cold, unyielding faces of the soldiers, he couldn't shake the feeling that their arrival came with a price, one he wasn't sure they were ready to pay. The battle raged on, but the tide had shifted. The Vrax, once unstoppable, now found themselves outmatched by the newcomers. Ryan Mitchell and his soldiers moved like ghosts, their weapons cutting through the alien ranks with terrifying efficiency. Each shot was precise, each movement deliberate. They didn't waste time or energy. They struck hard and fast, leaving no room for error. Daniel stood near the edge of the colony, watching the chaos unfold. His rifle hung loosely in his hands, forgotten for the moment. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the scene before him. These soldiers weren't just better trained or better equipped. They were something else entirely. Their movements were almost mechanical, devoid of hesitation or fear. It was as if they felt nothing at all. Laura appeared beside him, her face pale but resolute. "They're incredible," she whispered, her voice tinged with awe and unease. "Yeah," Daniel muttered, his tone flat. "But what are they?" His question hung in the air, unanswered. Neither of them could shake the feeling that these soldiers were more than human. There was something unnatural about the way they fought, something cold and calculated that made Daniel's skin crawl. As the fighting began to die down, Mitchell approached them. His armor was scratched and scorched, but he showed no signs of fatigue. He stopped a few feet away, his sharp gaze sweeping over the colonists who had gathered nearby. "You're safe for now," he said, his voice steady and commanding. "But this isn't over. The Vraks will regroup and come back stronger. We need to prepare." Daniel stepped forward, his brow furrowing. "Prepare? With what? We've got nothing left." Mitchell's lips curled into a faint smirk. "You'll have us." "And who exactly are you?" Daniel asked, his tone sharper than he intended. "Where did you come from?" Mitchell studied him for a moment, his expression unreadable. "We're from Earth, a special unit created after the last war. Call us Insurance." "Insurance," Laura interjected, her voice trembling slightly. "Against what?" "Against extinction," Mitchell replied bluntly. "When humanity faced annihilation, we decided not to leave survival to chance. We built soldiers who could adapt, endure, and win, no matter the cost." His words sent a chill through the crowd. Daniel exchanged a glance with Laura, both of them silently processing what they had just heard. These weren't ordinary humans. They were engineered, enhanced, something beyond the rest of them. "What happens when the Vraks are gone?" Daniel asked cautiously. "What then?" Mitchell's gaze hardened. "That depends on you. If you can hold your ground, we'll protect you. But if you falter—" He let the sentence trail off, his meaning clear. Before anyone could respond, one of the soldiers, a younger man named Ethan Cole, approached carrying a wounded colonist. His helmet was tucked under his arm, revealing a face that looked barely old enough to shave. Despite his youth, there was a hardness in his eyes that didn't match his age. Laura hurried over to help, guiding Ethan toward a makeshift medical station. As she worked, she noticed how quiet he was, how carefully he avoided meeting her gaze. Unlike Mitchell, Ethan seemed different, less distant, somehow. Back at the barricade, Daniel watched the soldiers move among the colonists, assessing damage and organizing defenses. They worked quickly, their actions efficient but detached. It was as if they saw the survivors not as people, but as pieces on a chessboard. "They're not here to save us," Daniel murmured to himself, his fists clenching at his sides. "They're here to win." Laura joined him a few minutes later, her hands still smeared with blood. "Do you think they'll really stay? Or will they leave once the Vraks are gone?" "I don't know," Daniel admitted, his voice heavy with uncertainty. "But I don't trust them. Not completely." As night fell, the colony settled into an uneasy calm. The soldiers set up watch posts around the perimeter, their presence both reassuring and unsettling. For the first time in days, the colonists slept without fear of immediate attack. But as Daniel lay awake, staring at the stars, he couldn't shake the feeling that their salvation might come at a price too high to pay. The next morning brought a strange kind of calm to the colony. The Vraks hadn't returned yet, and for the first time in weeks, the air wasn't filled with the sounds of gunfire or explosions. Instead, there was an uneasy quiet, broken only by the distant hum of the soldiers' equipment and the soft murmur of colonists talking in hushed tones. Daniel found himself watching Ryan Mitchell closely. The man moved through the camp like a shadow, inspecting every corner, issuing orders without raising his voice. There was something magnetic about him, something that demanded respect, even fear, but Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that Mitchell was hiding something big. Laura noticed Daniel's unease as she approached him near the edge of the colony. "You've been staring at him all morning," she said, nodding toward Mitchell. "What's on your mind?" "I don't trust him," Daniel replied bluntly. "He says they're here to help, but it feels off." "Off how?" Laura asked, folding her arms across her chest. "He's too perfect," Daniel muttered. "Him and his team, they fight like machines. They don't hesitate. They don't make mistakes. And they barely talk to us unless they have to. Laura frowned, glancing over at Mitchell. Maybe that's just how they're trained. You heard what he said. They're supposed to be better than us. Better. Daniel snapped, his voice rising slightly. That's not what I'm worried about. What happens if we're not worth saving? What if they decide we're too weak, too useless to keep around? Before Laura could respond, Mitchell appeared beside them, his sudden presence startling both of them. Something you want to say, Carter? He asked, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp. Daniel hesitated, then shook his head. No, just wondering where you people came from. Mitchell studied him for a moment before speaking. Earth created us when it realized humanity couldn't survive on its own. We're stronger, faster, smarter. Everything you aren't. And what happens after this is over? Daniel pressed, ignoring Laura's warning glance. Do you pack up and leave? Or do you stick around and clean up the mess? Mitchell's lips curled into a faint smile, but there was no warmth in it. That depends on Earth Command. My job is to eliminate the Vrax threat. What comes next isn't my decision. But it's someone's decision, right? Daniel shot back. Who decides whether we live or die? For a brief moment, Mitchell's mask slipped. His jaw tightened, and his gaze flickered away, as if searching for the right words. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, almost hesitant. Not everything is black and white, Carter. Sometimes survival means making choices you don't like. The answer unsettled Daniel more than he cared to admit. He opened his mouth to ask another question, but Mitchell turned and walked away before he could speak. Later that afternoon, Daniel found himself working alongside one of the soldiers, a woman named Sarah Monroe. She was helping him repair a damaged generator, her movements quick and efficient. Unlike Mitchell, she seemed less guarded, though still distant. You're not like them, Daniel said suddenly, breaking the silence between them. Sarah paused, her hands resting on the tool in her grip. Like who? Your team. You seem different. She gave him a small, humorless smile. Different doesn't mean better. What does it mean then? Daniel asked, his curiosity getting the better of him. Sarah hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. It means I remember what it's like to be human. Most of them don't. Her words sent a chill down Daniel's spine. Before he could ask what she meant, she went back to work, her expression closing off again. It was clear she didn't want to say more. As the day wore on, Daniel couldn't stop thinking about Sarah's comment. What did it mean to lose your humanity? And were these soldiers truly saviors, or something far more dangerous? By evening, the colony was buzzing with activity. The soldiers had begun fortifying the perimeter, their efforts turning the battered settlement into something resembling a fortress. Despite their efficiency, the colonists kept their distance, unsure whether to feel safe or threatened. Daniel sat alone near the edge of the camp, staring at the horizon. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. For the first time, he allowed himself to wonder, not just about the Vrax, but about the cost of survival. If defeating the enemy meant becoming like them, was it really worth it? The days passed quickly under the watchful eyes of Ryan Mitchell and his soldiers. The colony was changing, slowly transforming into something stronger, but also colder. Barricades were reinforced with precision, weapons were distributed more evenly, and the colonists began to follow orders from the newcomers without question. It was clear that Mitchell's team had taken control, but not everyone felt comfortable with it. Laura spent most of her time working alongside Ethan Cole, the young soldier who had carried in a wounded colonist during the first battle. Unlike the others, Ethan seemed willing to talk, even if he kept his answers short. He helped her organize medical supplies and treated injuries when she asked for assistance. Though his hands moved with the same efficiency as the rest of his team, there was a softness in his voice that made him different. You're not like them, Laura said one evening as they sorted bandages by the light of a flickering lantern. Why is that? Ethan paused, his fingers brushing against a torn roll of gauze. I'm not sure what you mean. The others, they act like machines. But you seem human. Ethan looked away, his jaw tightening. For a moment, he didn't speak. Then, quietly, he said, "Maybe I'm just better at pretending." His words stayed with Laura long after their conversation ended. She couldn't stop thinking about what it meant to pretend, to hide behind a mask while the world fell apart around you. Was that how these soldiers survived? By burying their humanity deep inside. Meanwhile, Daniel worked closely with Sarah Monroe on repairing damaged equipment. They weren't friends, but a quiet understanding had formed between them. Sarah didn't say much, but she listened when Daniel spoke, and sometimes, late at night, she shared fragments of stories about her past, before she became part of Operation Black Dawn. "I used to have a family," she admitted one night as they tinkered with an old radio. "A husband, a daughter. They didn't make it through the last war." Daniel stopped what he was doing, looking at her in surprise. "I'm sorry." She shrugged, though her eyes betrayed the pain she tried to hide. "It's why I joined this unit. I thought I could protect people, make sure no one else loses what I lost." "But now," Daniel asked cautiously, "do you still feel like you're protecting us?" Sarah hesitated, her hands hovering over the radio. "Sometimes. Other times." She trailed off, shaking her head. "It doesn't matter. We do what we're told." Her answer left Daniel uneasy. He wanted to ask more questions, but before he could, the sound of footsteps interrupted them. Mitchell approached, his expression unreadable. "Monroe," he barked. "Report to the perimeter. We've got movement out there." Sarah nodded sharply and stood up, leaving without another word. Daniel watched her go, feeling a pang of guilt for prying into her life. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that these soldiers carried burdens far heavier than anyone realized. As the days turned into weeks, the line between colonists and soldiers began to blur. Laura found herself relying on Ethan more often, trusting his judgment in situations where she felt overwhelmed. Daniel worked tirelessly alongside Sarah, learning skills that would help keep the colony running. Slowly, bonds began to form, fragile connections built on shared struggles and mutual respect. But not everyone trusted the newcomers. Some colonists whispered among themselves, questioning whether the soldiers truly had their best interests at heart. Kevin, the man who had argued against fighting earlier, remained openly hostile. "They're using us," he muttered one night during a tense meeting. "Once the Vraks are gone, they'll leave us here to rot, or worse." Mitchell silenced him with a single glare. "If you'd rather face the Vraks alone, be my guest. Otherwise, keep your doubts to yourself." Despite the tension, the colony grew stronger. With the soldiers' guidance, the survivors learned to fight smarter, to conserve resources, to work together as a team. For the first time since the invasion began, there was a sense of purpose, a fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, they could win. But beneath the surface, questions lingered. Who were these soldiers, really? And what price would they demand for their help? As Daniel lay awake one night, staring at the stars, he couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest battles were yet to come, not against the Vraks, but within themselves. The colony had settled into a tense rhythm, balancing survival with preparation for the next Vraks attack. But Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The soldiers were efficient, almost too perfect, and their presence weighed heavily on him. He spent most nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling of the makeshift shelter he shared with Laura. His mind raced with questions he couldn't answer. One evening, while repairing a damaged communication array, Daniel noticed something strange. A faint transmission crackled through the static, too quiet to make out clearly, but unmistakably human. It wasn't the same message Laura had intercepted before. This one was different. Curious, he adjusted the frequency, trying to amplify the signal. "Black Dawn Operative Mitchell. Confirm status. Protocol override." The voice was distorted, but Daniel recognized it immediately. It belonged to someone from Earth Command. His heart sank as he pieced together fragments of the conversation. Words like containment and termination stood out sharply against the background noise. Containment. Termination. What did that mean? Before he could process what he'd heard, footsteps approached from behind. Startled, Daniel turned off the device and spun around. Ethan Cole stood there, his helmet tucked under his arm. His expression was unreadable. "What are you doing?" Ethan asked, his tone cautious. "Nothing," Daniel replied quickly, forcing a smile. "Just checking if we can boost the signal." Ethan studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Let me know if you find anything useful." He walked away without another word, leaving Daniel alone with his thoughts. Daniel's hands trembled as he replayed the transmission in his mind. Containment. Termination. The words haunted him. Was Operation Black Dawn here to save them, or to ensure they didn't fall into enemy hands? The implications were chilling. That night, Daniel confided in Laura. They sat together near the edge of the camp, far enough from prying ears. The air was cool, and the distant glow of alien fires lit up the horizon. "I overheard something," Daniel began, his voice low. "A transmission meant for Mitchell. They mentioned containment and termination." Laura frowned, her brow furrowing. "What does that mean?" "I don't know," Daniel admitted, running a hand through his hair. "But it doesn't sound good. What if they're planning to destroy the colony once the Vraks are gone? Or worse, what if they think we're already compromised?" Laura's eyes widened in alarm. "Do you think they'd actually do that?" "I don't know," Daniel repeated, his voice heavy with uncertainty. "But I don't trust them. Not completely." Laura hesitated, glancing toward the center of the camp, where Mitchell and his team were gathered. "We need proof," she said finally. "If we tell people without knowing for sure, it'll cause panic." "You're right," Daniel agreed. "But how do we get proof?" They decided to gather evidence carefully, keeping their suspicions to themselves. Over the next few days, Daniel observed Mitchell and his team more closely, looking for any sign of deception. Meanwhile, Laura tried to build trust with Ethan, hoping he might reveal something unintentionally. It wasn't easy. The soldiers were guarded, their movements precise and deliberate. Even Ethan, who seemed more human than the others, rarely let his guard down. Still, Laura persisted, sharing stories about life before the invasion and asking subtle questions about his past. One afternoon, while treating a minor injury Ethan had sustained during training, Laura ventured a risky question. "Do you ever wonder what happens after all this is over?" Ethan paused, his gaze dropping to the ground. "Sometimes," he admitted softly, "but wondering doesn't change anything." "Does Mitchell talk about it?" Laura pressed gently. Ethan shook his head. "Mitchell doesn't talk about much. He follows orders. So do I." His answer left Laura uneasy. She wanted to ask more, but Ethan stood up abruptly, signaling the end of their conversation. As he walked away, Laura felt a pang of guilt, but also determination. Whatever secrets these soldiers carried, she and Daniel needed to uncover them before it was too late. As the days passed, the weight of their discovery grew heavier. Daniel and Laura knew they were running out of time. The Vraks would return soon, and when they did, the colony's fate would hang in the balance, not just against the aliens, but against the very people sent to protect them. The Vraks' attack came without warning, shattering the fragile calm that had settled over the colony. It was the largest assault yet, with waves of alien soldiers descending from their ships like a swarm of insects. Their weapons glowed brighter, their cries sharper, as if they knew this battle would decide the fate of Zoreth 7. Daniel and Laura were jolted awake by the sound of explosions. They scrambled out of their shelter to find chaos erupting around them. The barricades were holding, for now, but the pressure was relentless. Mitchell barked orders to his team, directing them to reinforce weak points in the defense line. His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it, a tension that hadn't been there before. "Stay close," Daniel shouted to Laura as they rushed toward the front lines. "We can't afford to get separated." Laura nodded, clutching her medical bag tightly. She knew the stakes. This wasn't just another skirmish. If the colony fell tonight, there would be no second chances. Amid the chaos, Ethan Cole stood shoulder to shoulder with the colonists, firing his weapon with unshakable focus. For once, he didn't seem distant or detached. He fought with a fierce determination that inspired those around him. When a group of Vraks broke through the perimeter, Ethan charged forward, shielding the young colonist who had frozen in fear. A burst of alien fire struck his armor, sending him sprawling to the ground. "Ethan," Laura cried, running toward him despite the danger. "I'm fine," he grunted as she helped him up, though blood trickled from a wound on his side. "Keep moving. Don't stop." Laura hesitated, torn between treating his injury and returning to the fight, but Ethan shoved her gently away. "Go. I'll hold them off." Reluctantly, she obeyed, her heart pounding as she rejoined Daniel near the main barricade. The sight of Ethan risking himself for a colonist gave her hope. Even among these soldiers, humanity still flickered. As the battle raged on, Daniel noticed something unusual. Ryan Mitchell, usually so composed, seemed agitated. He paced back and forth, speaking urgently into a small communicator strapped to his wrist. Whatever response he received made his face darken with frustration. "We need to fall back," Mitchell shouted suddenly, raising his voice above the din. "Regroup at the central bunker." The order sent shockwaves through the defenders. Falling back meant abandoning large sections of the colony to the Vraks. Panic rippled through the crowd, but Mitchell's glare silenced any protests. "No," Daniel stepped forward, confronting him. "If we retreat now, we lose everything. We can still hold them here." Mitchell grabbed Daniel by the arm, his grip like iron. "You don't understand. This isn't about holding ground. It's about survival. If we stay, we'll all die. And if we run, the Vraks will hunt us down anyway." Daniel shot back, his voice rising. "You're supposed to protect us, not abandon us." For a moment, Mitchell's mask slipped, his eyes softened, and his voice dropped to a whisper. "I'm trying to save as many as I can. But my orders are clear. If the colony falls, I can't risk letting you become hostages. You have to trust me." Daniel stared at him, disbelief warring with anger. Trust? How could they trust someone who might destroy them the moment the Vraks were gone? Before he could respond, Sarah Monroe appeared beside them, her face pale but resolute. "Sir, the eastern flank is collapsing. We need to move now." Mitchell released Daniel and turned away, issuing commands to his team. As the soldiers began organizing the retreat, Daniel caught Sarah's gaze. "What does he mean?" he demanded. "What happens if the colony falls?" Sarah hesitated, then shook her head. "I can't tell you. Just stay alive, okay?" Her words chilled him to the bone. Whatever Operation Black Dawn's true mission was, it wasn't just about defeating the Vraks. As the survivors retreated toward the bunker, the colony burned behind them. Flames licked at the sky, casting an orange glow over the battlefield. Ethan limped along with the group, refusing help despite his injury. Laura stayed close to Daniel, her expression grim. "We can't let them win," Daniel muttered under his breath. "Not like this." Laura nodded, though doubt clouded her eyes. "If we survive tonight, we'll figure it out. Together." Together. That word gave Daniel strength. No matter what secrets Mitchell and his soldiers carried, one thing was certain: the colonists wouldn't go down without a fight. The bunker was cramped and tense, filled with the sounds of heavy breathing and muffled sobs. The colonists huddled together, their faces etched with exhaustion and fear. Outside, the Vraks' assault continued, their weapons tearing through what remained of the colony. For a moment, it felt like the end, like there was no way out. But Daniel refused to give up. He stood near the entrance, staring at the chaos beyond the thick metal door. His mind raced, searching for a solution. "We can't just sit here," he said aloud, his voice cutting through the silence. "If we don't act now, we'll lose everything." Ryan Mitchell turned to face him, his expression unreadable. "And what do you suggest, Carter? Charging out there blindly won't change anything." "No," Daniel replied, his tone firm. "But if we fight together, one last push, we might stand a chance. Your team is strong, but so are we. We've survived this long because we've fought side by side. Let's finish it that way." Laura stepped forward, her eyes meeting Mitchell's. "He's right. If you pull back and leave us behind, we're dead anyway. But if we work as one, maybe we can win." For a long moment, Mitchell didn't speak. His gaze shifted between Daniel, Laura, and the rest of the colonists. Finally, he exhaled sharply, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "Fine," he said, his voice low but decisive. "We'll make our stand here, but listen carefully. If this fails, none of us will walk away." The plan was simple but desperate. The soldiers would lead the charge, using their advanced weapons to break through the Vrax lines. The colonists would follow, armed with whatever they could carry, and strike at the enemy's weak points. Their target was clear: the Vrax Command Center, a towering structure glowing faintly in the distance. Destroying it would cripple their forces and force them to retreat. As they prepared, Ethan approached Daniel and Laura. His armor was scratched, his movements slower than before, but his eyes burned with determination. "I'll cover you," he said quietly. "Stay alive, okay?" Laura nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "You too." When the time came, the group moved as one. Mitchell led the charge, his soldiers forming a protective wall around the colonists. The Vrax were caught off guard by the sudden counterattack, their ranks faltering under the relentless assault. Plasma fire lit up the battlefield, and the air was thick with smoke and screams. Daniel fought alongside Sarah, their movements synchronized despite the chaos. "Why are you doing this?" he asked her as they reloaded their weapons behind a makeshift barricade. "Because you reminded me of something," she admitted, her voice barely audible over the noise. "Survival isn't worth it if we lose ourselves in the process." Laura stayed close to Ethan, treating wounds on the fly and urging people forward. When a Vrax soldier lunged at her, Ethan threw himself into its path, taking the hit meant for her. He collapsed to the ground, his breaths shallow, but managed a weak smile. "Told you. To stay alive." Tears blurred Laura's vision, but she forced herself to keep moving. There would be time to grieve later, if they survived. Finally, they reached the command center. Daniel and Mitchell worked together to plant explosives, their hands steady despite the danger. As the charges detonated, a deafening roar shook the ground, and the Vrax forces began to withdraw. When the dust settled, the survivors gathered amidst the ruins. The colony was battered, nearly destroyed, but it still stood. Mitchell looked around at the weary faces, his expression softer than before. "You did good," he said simply. "Better than I expected." As the Black Dawn operatives prepared to leave, Laura approached Mitchell. "What happens now? Will Earth forget about us again?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "Not this time. You've proven you're worth fighting for." Though the road ahead would be long, the colonists knew they had earned something precious: a future. Together, they began rebuilding, not just their homes, but their hope. And for the first time in months, it felt real.